with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Hey, Rich, I'm really enthralled by all of this Mars stuff. I mean, isn't this really cool? With the landing on Mars, the latest landing with the rover InSight, and you see these pictures that's coming back?
No, I am stunned by it.
I mean,
and you know what's really great? We
I'm
know how to do it
right now.
We know how to do it. The other guys can't do it. We know how to do it. You know, we knew how to do the moon. I can't wait till we get back there and they can pick up the food that was left by the guys. It's only been there since the 70s. You know, here's the proof. Here's the peanut butter sandwich they brought.
But you see these photos, and you see that's coming back, and you say, wow, that's Mars. And you take a look at the landscape, and it's got this reddish tint to it.
Yeah, but you know what worries me? Matt Damon's not in any of the pictures. I mean, I've only seen The Martian. I can't even tell you how many times because I love the book.
Well, you know, I'm looking at this and these things coming back, and I'm looking for Elon Musk, and I don't kind of see him walking around up there.
No, he's under his table.
Oh, okay.
He's under his, I saw it on TV. He's under his table. Everything's fine. He's got some good dope.
He's hiding behind a rock and smoking a doob.
Yeah, he's smoking a doob. Yeah, he is. Doesn't every chairman of a publicly traded company do that? I bet that made them happy in the boardroom.
I guess so.
Yeah, he fell off the wagon again, but hey, you know what? He's got a nice T-shirt on.
I don't know if there's any laws against that on Mars yet, but that's pretty funny. But you know, the way that they get the rover down and the way that they have to land it, you know, so gently and all that technology and everything that's going on, it's
America. It's America. It defines who we are.
And, you know, back in the 50s and 60s, you know, General Motors, I'm going to switch gears here to General Motors because we got to talk about General Motors.
Sure.
They made the most incredible cars. I got a 1966 big block Corvette.
I know. Beautiful. I've seen
Absolutely
it. I've been
gorgeous.
there.
And a 1969 Camaro. And, you know, a big block Camaro.
Right.
It was actually a tribute car that for the Indianapolis 500 in 1969. Mm-hmm. Incidentally, the only Indianapolis 500 that Mario Andretti won. He won that year.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I mean, General Motors, I mean, they were the king of the muscle car. I mean, they were the king of all cars, really.
Absolutely.
I mean, they were really at the top of their game. And
I had a 442 in 1971.
That was a
Oldsmobile.
Yeah.
Of course, Oldsmobile. It wasn't my grandfather's car. They're not here anymore.
Yeah, they're gone. They're gone.
But in 69, not a GM, but I had a 69 Dodge Charger RT, 383, 4-barrel. Great car.
Yeah.
6 tickets.
It got the move pretty quickly.
Uh-huh.
But GM, I mean, wow. I mean, they really invented the whole muscle car thing, and they were at the top of the game, and just American manufacturing and
Well, Corvette was the most iconic American car known the worldwide, and everyone tried to keep up with that. You're right, 100%. And you've got a great year.
And until today.
Yeah.
But look at GM. I mean, look at, you know, everything that it's gone through. I mean, we're landing rovers on Mars and sending back all these beautiful photos, and you got GM, this iconic American company that continues to implode. And, you know, wow. You know, I mean,
well, Neil, why, you know, here's a company that built a car called the Volt. All right, the Volt. We've talked about this for years. All right, the Volt. And the Volt goes.
That was not a good thing.
Not a good. The original concept was how far does it go? About 60 miles. If you don't put the air on, 60 miles. But it came with Moby Dick. So if you break down, you got something to do.
And don't get in a fender bender.
You know, don't. Yeah.
But very dangerous.
Right. Exactly.
Hey, we got someone coming on to join us right now to talk about GM and these layoffs and what's going on at GM and, you know, what are their problems? Is it the tariffs? Are there bigger problems than that? I mean, what's really going on with this? 15,000 people, Rich. 15,000 people are being laid off at GM after this massive American taxpayer bailout. You know, they still don't seem to get their act together. Very pleased to have with us right now Ryan Young from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Ryan, welcome to Made in America.
Thanks for having me.
So, you know, what is going on at GM? I mean, Are they? They made the announcements, and I read your blog, by the way, on the website of Competitive Enterprise Institute on about this, and the tariffs. It's cost them $1 billion or so, but they're not really wanting to say that because maybe it's going to upset the president, and the president's already saying, you're laying off all these people and closing these factories, so we're going to have to do something about that, and we're going to make you regret that decision. And I mean, what's going on? I mean, what is the state of GM today? And, is it the economy? Is it just they have to do this just because everybody's got to do this once in a while?
Well, they're doing okay in the short run. What they're worried about is the long run. So they're reacting now while the economy is still strong. And if anything, the tariffs are what forced their hand. GM and Ford both made statements earlier this year saying that based on current levels, the steel tariffs alone will cost them, actually the tariffs all told, the China tariffs and the steel and aluminum tariffs will cost them about $1 billion per year going forward. Just for a little bit of context, 14,700 people are losing their jobs. $1 billion in tariffs is equivalent to a year's pay for 24,000 workers. So the tariffs alone are enough they're costing the people their jobs. But like I said, that's just the icing on the cake. People's tastes are changing. People are moving away from muscle cars and sedans and towards SUVs, and the plants that are closing make sedans. And some of the models those are exactly the models that GM is discontinuing. And as a Buick LaCrosse owner, I'm a little sad to see that my car is going away. And you guys mentioned the Chevy Volt earlier. That was basically a government-subsidized white elephant, and that sure didn't help either. So there are a lot of factors in play here, and the tariffs made a potentially bad long-run situation even worse. They may have forced GM's hand.
Well, it does concern me, and I guess when you connect the dots, and I can understand. I was listening to Stuart Varney this morning, whom I love, and he said he's on the fence right now about this because he can see both sides of everything Ryan just said. People getting laid off, GM building cars that don't make sense. But when you look at the stimulus package and the money and TARP that was given to GM, and you look at how the administration. I've never seen an administration fire a CEO of a publicly traded corporation like GM. Wagner was out. The equity for the bondholders got destroyed. The money went to GM and almost right to the union. The union recirculated that money and gave it back to their favorite charities. You can guess what that was. And here GM hasn't even paid back the United States government all the money that they were borrowing or getting from the government. And what's happening? It looks like the middle class folks are going to take the hit again. So I think we can understand to a degree how upset these people are.
Yeah, it's entirely understandable. If there's a larger lesson to be drawn here, it's that when the government offers to help, the best thing to do is to say no. It's hurting GM much more than it's helping. And even bringing the discussion back to the tariffs, President Trump's whole goal behind his new tariffs is to help American manufacturing, and it's having the opposite effect. The policy is not working. So hopefully President Trump will reverse the tariffs because they're hurting the American economy, they're hurting the middle class, and we're seeing that right now with GM. Just on top of everything else the government has done for and to the company, this is just making matters even worse.
Well, Ryan, in order for the president to reverse the tariffs, I mean, he's going to have to make this a big win for the administration.
He has to have a great dinner this week. That's what he has to have. I mean, it comes down to the dinner.
Well, they're serving Argentine beef, so hopefully it's a great cut and a good bottle of wine. I don't know what they got to do down there, but there's some good beef, there's some good wine. Hopefully there's going to be some good feelings going in that room. With the president and President Xi. I don't know. Are they going to get along? Are they going to enjoy themselves? Is this going to be very contentious?
That's the billion-dollar question. I don't know, and I don't think President Xi or President Trump know either. So we'll find out. But
well, Ryan, let me ask you this before we lose you. Could China look at this situation and realize that they can leverage that against Trump? The fact that GM's going to be in a problem losing jobs.
Another thing, Ryan, is that GM and China, they have a major footprint over there.
Absolutely,
that's a big part of their investment. I mean, they're hugely invested in the China automobile market, and how does that play into this dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, the long and the short of it is that a lot of policy mistakes have been made, and both President Xi and President Trump are very interested in saving face no matter what happens. President Trump took a big gamble in enacting these tariffs, and that gamble is not paying off. What he needs to do is admit that he made a mistake. The question is, how can he do that gracefully, undoing his mistake and saving face at the same time? That is a very difficult balancing act, and I don't know if that's a step that he's willing to take.
Yeah. And we're all watching and waiting here. This is going to be very, very incredible to see the outcome. Hey, Ryan, thanks for being on the show. We've been listening to Ryan Young from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Dr. Rothman and I are going to be right back to talk about a number of things that impact your jobs. You don't want to miss this.
Made in America.
Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Hey, Rich, it is a really big deal. I mean, if you go to China, you see GM cars all over the place.
Buick is huge in China.
They've done.
I've been to China a bunch.
Yeah, GM. What do they call it? GM Shanghai. I mean, but they've been one of the very first to go to China and to invest, and their cars are in great demand. They've done very well over there. So there was things in the press coming up this week. With President Trump saying, well, we're going to put a 25% tariff on foreign automobiles. And then it's going to be, well, maybe we'll put a 25% tariff on Chinese automobiles. And I'm kind of thinking, do you see any China automobiles driving around here? There are no cars made in China that I know about. So what cars are we going to put a tariff on from
Neal,
China?
We don't even have good Chinese restaurants in South Florida. And the answer to that is when you go to a Chinese restaurant in Miami, they have Cuban waiters. Does that say something to you? Does that tell you something?
Yeah. So
I don't see any Chinese cars.
I see no Chinese cars.
No, I don't see any Chinese cars.
So here it is. GM, hugely invested, American taxpayer money, bailed them out. They say, okay, we're going to bet on the Chinese market. And now the Chinese are putting all these tariffs on our cars. GM is in really a difficult spot. They can't complain about the tariffs because then they're going to get the wrath of President Trump's going to come down hard on them. And
they're getting it anyway. They're getting it anyway right now.
And then his policies are making their huge investment in China, much more dangerous, especially if the Chinese want to retaliate more, especially if there are more tariffs. So I don't know, man. It's a complicated situation. We're going to talk more about China in a moment. There's so much going on here. There's so much at stake. This thing, our trade relationships, the jobs that are at stake. It's absolutely incredible. And supply chains, getting components and parts for our factories that we need. And let me tell you, a lot of those things come from overseas. Yes, we make a lot of products in America. Yes, you're hearing manufacturing in America is doing well. $2.5 trillion of it. I think since the early 2000s, our manufacturing is doing better than it has nearly in the last 20 years. So there is a lot to be said for President Trump and his policies. However, a lot of people, Rich, are saying there are some real black clouds just over the horizon here, and that there could be a major correction to the market. And if you see all this volatility that's been in the market, where's that going? I mean, where is that going? Is the bottom going to fall out here?
Well, here's the confusion to all of this, and this is I'm fascinated by this. Earlier this week, the Feds say that the economy is near neutral. The market's great about it. They jumped 600 points in one day. The very next day, the Feds come out with a statement. I mean, this is incredible. It was on CNBC. Feds warn that a particularly large plunge in the market prices is possible if risks materialize, and they're not quite sure about whether they should, raise the rates. And I'm like, wait a minute, are we psychotic? I mean, my God, we have the yin to the yang. You know what, Neil? I find it very confusing to try and follow anything because the problem is we're up one day dramatically. I mean, 600 points in one day is a huge, raise. And then to come down, now, today it was down about 63 points as of the show right now. But what worries me is that statements and words have meaning right now, and they artificially inflate or deflate markets. And I am worried. I'm worried that if we cook this economy by raising rates and we kill it a little bit, yeah, I think we could have a problem. But you could always have I mean, if you look at a statement like this, well, they're warning that a particularly large plunge, in market prices is possible if risks materials. Well, yeah, if everything is possible. So I didn't even understand a statement like that, Neil. Do you?
Yeah, it's crazy. And what happens, with all of this and all of this banter that's going on, people, they decide, their confidence, and confidence means you're either going to invest and you're going to do things and you're going to try to grow your business, or you're going to kind of sit back. And right now, if you're an investor, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a small business owner, if you're a risk taker, and you're reading all of this stuff and going through all this stuff and saying, yes, is this the time? Is this the moment? You would be in a very confused state.
Well, you know what I think is probably doing well right now? And this is for David Brim. I think he'll appreciate this. That I think Nicorette is probably doing really well for those who have no idea what's going on. They're totally scared about the marketplace. They can't smoke cigarettes anymore because it'll kill them, but they need nicotine to make it through the day. So Nicorette, invest in that. That's what I'm saying. But here's what really does. I'm going to get serious for a second. So General Motors is worried about their plants. They shut them down and so forth like that. But at the same time, BMW is saying, hey, you know what? Because of the tariffs, we might put a second plant in the United States, and it might be right next door to the other plant that they have in a right-to-work state called South Carolina. Now, how does that balance out?
Well, it balances out because the Europeans and the Asians have found a way to be very profitable in America manufacturing cars.
Just make them here.
Make them in a right-to-work state.
Yeah.
And
make good cars.
Leave the Midwest, unfortunately, leave Ohio, move down south, and that's where you're going to find, a much more hospitable environment, including a really great labor force in state governments and local governments who are really, really happy you're there. So there's a lesson to be learned.
I got the lesson.
We're going to continue on our conversation here about President Trump, what's going on with China, and are there other things that President Trump can do to get China to the table to make things more fair? We're going to have with us Clark Packard from the R Street Institute. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman. So, Rich, we've been having a lot of discussions about America's trade relationships. Very, very important. We have done so over the years, but just lately, just headline after headline about America's trade relationships, and specifically our trade relationship with China. What should it be? And then you got all of these other folks, that's kind of participating in it. So just last week, we had Stephen Moore join us, a very good friend of ours, an economic advisor to the president. He was there back when the president wasn't the president and was candidate for president and advising him. And he gave us a pretty bleak outlook, actually, about President Trump's going to stick to his guns. The Chinese are not going to come with any proposals that's going to really make sense.
But he endorsed what the president was doing.
Very much so. And, Stephen's been on our show, how many times, and a very big free trader, fair trader for, during the Obama administration. He was on with us, I don't know how many times. And President Obama, he was not a fan of trade. Of course, he was a fan of the unions. And whatever the unions did, he was the puppet of the unions. And whatever they wanted, he did. President Trump is seeing it a little bit differently, but the impact is the same. He's taking a very, very harsh view towards America's trade relationships. Well, we're very pleased to have on with us Rich and everybody else out there. Clark Packard from the R Street Institute is going to talk about President Trump and China, the G20, and other trade agreements that might actually force China to open its markets. Hey, Clark, welcome to Made in America.
Thanks for having me on.
So there's a big dinner going on. There's a big dinner going on here down in Argentina.
Yes.
And boy, I'd like to be a fly on the wall in that room. You know, I can't imagine, you know how that's going to go. But any predictions?
Well, look, I mean, I think that we're coming to a consensus in Washington and the United States more broadly that the U.S.-China trade relationship is flawed. There's no question that China abuses certain trade practices, and the United States needs to be serious about that and address that head on. I do think, though, that there's a smart way to do it and a less smart way to go about that. And I think that what we're going to see coming out of the G20, my hope is that we're going to see a sort of a de-escalation in rhetoric and policy. My hope is that China agrees to open up some, buy more agriculture exports, for instance, and we won't ratchet up the tariffs. But sooner or later, the United States has to have a reckoning with China about the future of this trading relationship. And again, I think more and more we're coming to realize that it has been flawed, and we need to be thoughtful in how we approach that.
So, Rich, I mean, what are you seeing out of this? I mean, how do we get them to the table? I mean, every president since President Trump, has always talked tough and has not done anything, right? Everybody gets elected. Oh, I'm going to get tough on China. I'm going to get tough on China. The President Bush said that. George W. Bush, President Obama, of course. I mean, he was so anti-trade. I mean, he had to get the unions all jazzed up, and so he was really, really. I mean, it was even President Obama said, "Hey, we're going to get out of NAFTA. We just got to end NAFTA." I mean, all of these trade agreements are not good. Obviously, taking the lead from the unions, and now President Trump got elected on saying, "I'm going to get tough with China," and my goodness, he's actually done it. So he's actually done what everybody else says that they're going to do, and that's probably why we're not seeing the Democrats raise holy Cain about all of this, is because they're the ones who promised to do this and they've done nothing.
Well, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that we can't continue down the road that we've been on for decades, where China just unilaterally takes advantage of the West, and particularly the United States. Obviously, we're the big elephant in the room on that. And so I think that's a good thing, and I think we have to do something about it. My question is that what I think is confusing, guys like yourself, you're a big manufacturer in the United States. You have a number of companies throughout the United States. You have a manufacturing company in China. You want to know where you stand, and you need to know where you're going to be 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, a year out, so you can plan and facilitate all the things you need to do for employees, products, distribution, and so forth. So the question is, does this double talk all the time, going back and forth, help or hurt? And what else does Trump have in his arsenal to really facilitate change?
So what does he have, Clark? What is there that he can do? I mean, we just had Ryan Young from the Competitive Enterprise Institute with us just a moment ago, and he was saying, hey, look, the auto industry, all of our manufacturing, it's really getting hurt by tariffs. These tariffs were a bad idea. They were a mistake. President Trump has to find a way to admit that he made a mistake and get out of it. Now, I never, ever see President Trump admitting that he made a mistake.
Yeah, that's a tough
So that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But, there is, some very strong voices, smart voices on both sides of this topic, that's out there advocating for totally different ways to handle this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if you look back in early October of this year, Vice President Pence delivered a pretty searing rebuke of China and its trade policy practices. And then shortly thereafter, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, former Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson delivered a speech in Singapore where, he has always been sort of a dove toward China and said, it sort of acknowledged that, look, the United States and perhaps me, I got this somewhat wrong. But I also think that sort of a unilateral retrenchment or, sort of a Cold War style mentality isn't going to work right now, because what you're going to do is you're going to force countries, particularly in Asia, who may agree with the United States' complaints about China, but given the geographic proximity to China and given how intertwined their economies are, it's forced to choose. A lot of those countries are going to side with China here. What I have advocated, and I testified before the president's trade representative, and what I said was you need to use the World Trade Organization's dispute settlement, file a huge case, a holistic case against China at the WTO, and let's get serious about this. We've been sort of dancing around the edges of this for too long. I think the time is right to bring a holistic case against China at the WTO, see if that will work, and then if not, we're sort of in the same position. But I would urge the administration.
I would like to follow up with you on that point, but let's leave it at there for a second. We're going to take a quick break. We're on with Clark Packard from the Art Street Institute. We're talking about what should our policies be with trade and specifically China. Very important, huge impact on your jobs. You don't want to miss this.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we're on right now with Clark Packard from the R Street Institute. So, Clark, I liked your ideas about the WTO, but let's really think about this. The WTO is like the United Nations, but it's even more dysfunctional. I mean, completely dysfunctional. You got, 180 members, 190 members, no one who's got the interest of the United States at heart. In fact, most of them very anti-American, each with veto power. I mean, this is just an unruly, and many people believe unnecessary organization, and it has never served the interest of the United States. So bringing, it sounds great, though, to bring this case and getting all these nations together and come and go and try to get something done with China. But the fact is, I don't think it'll ever happen. And at the same time, I don't think that this administration will even give any credence or even want to legitimize the WTO to try to bring some sort of case against China there. Maybe someplace else, but not at the WTO.
Well, I mean, the United States has filed already a case dealing with China just back in March or April, dealing with how they impose licensing restrictions that are discriminatory against the United States. What I would say, though, is the United States has a vested interest in seeing the WTO continue. Frankly, I think the United States has been the biggest beneficiary of the WTO, and I think that we could build a coalition of countries that share our concerns about China and form sort of a trading bloc, whether that be the United States and the EU because of intellectual property concerns. Japan has also expressed similar concerns, Canada. So you can put together a large trading bloc, and what you have to do is put pressure on China. What I do not think will work are unilateral tariffs. I think, in fact, the United States Trade Representative issued a report last week that basically said, we've tried these tariffs and it hasn't changed China's behavior. I'm skeptical that unilateral tariffs will, over the long haul, change any behavior that Beijing engages in.
So I think you make a very, very good point, and I think there's some credence to what you're saying, and we're seeing the evidence of it, where the U.S. could put together a large coalition. I agree with you. I think, going with the leading countries, the leading trading blocs of the world makes sense.
Rich, why wouldn't we do it like, I think this is where the president's going, and I think it's pretty smart. Let's make a trade agreement with Japan. Let's make our own trade agreement with Europe. And then in those trade agreements, let's come together, not through the WTO, because, it's a really...
Directly with China.
It's a crazy organization. But let's just go together with these agreements that we put to place. Hey, look, the European Union, Japan, and the United States together, if they were to be united...
The USMCA.
USMCA. We'll put Canada and Mexico in there,
They've got cheerleaders already. It works.
Let's bring those guys together outside the WTO, and I think that's going to be much more impactful. What say you, Clark?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that if you want my policy prescription, I think that the United States should rejoin the TPP. I think
I agree. That's a very good point.
This is a good conversation here.
And let's bring the TPP, as part of that coalition, together with the European Union, the USMCA.
Yep.
The USMCA. God, I'm still not used to that. And get Japan. I think Japan's part of the TPP, right? So, I mean, they're already part of TPP. Bring all those folks together, put it together, these three groups coming together, say, China, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. Pound our fist on a desk and see what happens. I mean, if they got 80% of the world's economy against them, I don't know what they could do.
That's exactly right. The more countries you can bring into this trading bloc, the more pressure you can exert on China to raise its commercial standards. I mean, look, again, nobody disagrees that China abuses intellectual property and they force technology transfer and all kinds of crazy things. But again, I do think that this large coalition has the capability to put enormous commercial pressure and tighten the screws around China and say, the way you've been operating is not going to work going forward.
So Trans-Pacific Partnership, I mean, is that on ice right now? I mean, is that...
Well, how do you get Trump to embrace that? He pulled us out of it.
Yeah,
right.
How does he back up from that?
Well, look, he has said a couple different times that he's open to the idea. I know that it was a campaign issue, and it was one of his first official acts was withdrawing from the TPP. But, he did say to Senator Sass in a meeting in the Oval Office, we should look into this again. He flirted with the idea at Davos, at the World Economic Forum. I think that they need to take a step back. My problem here is the United States and the Trump administration seems to be looking at this in terms of a 2-month window or two-week window. The issue here is going to be changing China's commercial practices is a 5 to 10 year long, maybe even longer endeavor. So we need a thoughtful, long-term approach. And I think when you take a step back from the here and now, rejoining the TPP makes a lot of sense if your long-term goal is to change China's behavior.
Well, very good. Clark, I mean, these are all really, really great topics, and somehow, and we agree, we gotta exert pressure, and I think maybe not the WTO, but bringing together these other trade groups, we all want the same thing, and we all believe in the same thing: is that China is not treating us fairly. Hey, thanks for being on the show. We really appreciate your comments.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Coming up, Dr. Ruffin and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. Hey, Rich, speaking of China,
yeah, I have a couple of comments.
Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba. I mean, Alibaba, an incredible company. I mean, it's like the Amazon, the search engine for anything and everything that you would ever want in China.
It is super amazing.
It's
super
incredible.
Amazing.
The richest Chinese person in the world. And there's a lot of rich people in China.
He's the richest entrepreneur in China.
Maybe the world. I mean,
he's just amazing.
I don't know, even the world. But, I mean, the market cap of Alibaba is greater than Amazon. I mean, by a pretty long shot. So this company that he founded is absolutely incredible.
He did it, like a 3 or 4 hour deal in China, a special in one day, and he did like $80 billion in one day. I mean, I don't know what. That's an amazing number. But that's true.
Well, whatever that number was, he's just confirmed that he's a communist.
I know. Now, how do you explain that? Tell me how you explain that. Because a communist and a capitalist, you have two competing systems. So is that not an oxymoron? I don't get it.
I guess it depends on what the definition of communist is.
Oh, it's a definition of what is. This is how the Dems would spin it. Yeah, what is.
Well, it's kind of like what we talked about earlier, GM, got all this problem. They're laying these people off. They're closing plants, but they can't talk about tariffs. And it would upset the president. I guess in China, if Jack's not a communist, Big Brother in Beijing going to have a problem with that.
Maybe they spin it and they say, look what communism did for him. Yeah. And the people, they go, all right.
I want to be a communist.
I want to be a communist. It works for me. And everyone gets an Alibaba card. I don't know. I just find that amazing.
Absolutely incredible. But, China is, it's full of contradictions, isn't it?
Hey, Neil, I was just thinking, just this weird thought came to me, which they do occasionally. And I was thinking what we could do with China, with President Trump, trying to line them up. He should get that. I think it's a great idea to get these coalitions together, whether it's, it's Mexico and Canada and China, in Japan rather, in the European bloc, and they go there. They should meet at the Four Seasons in Tokyo. Because, first of all, the Chinese will get confused and think it's a Chinese restaurant anyway. You know what I mean? Because it says Four Seasons. And they always have something like that, like Lotus Blossom Restaurant or the Four Seasons Restaurant. Yeah, they go there and they buy all this food and they stiff the Chinese. They make them pay for it. I think that would bring leverage. We'll pick this up. You work with us.
Well, it'll make a point.
I guess it would make a point. I just wanted to lay that out there for a second. Anybody could comment on that later. We're interested.
Well, if the USTR has someplace on their website for making recommendations.
Well, yeah,
I think
maybe they could do that.
I think you should not go there.
But you know what? Now that you said Amazon, and here's a David Brim factoid that came across the wire. And Amazon handles nearly 50% of all online sales. Now, think for a second. Compare that to Jack Ma you just talked about. If Amazon is handling almost 50% of online sales, and Jack Ma is bigger, Jack Ma is amazing.
He's amazing.
Amazing. Factoid from the Brim.
Well, so Rich, it's absolutely incredible. Amazon, 50% of all business online, but I guess the Amazon employees aren't too happy, right? There was a big protest this Thanksgiving over work conditions and pay.
Yeah, they protested right after the Thanksgiving dinner. They finished their turkey, picked up their placards, and went. And, they really complained because, and this is not just one time. Amazon has a number of complaints from its employees that they make them work very, very long hours in very, very stringent conditions, and they're not happy with it. It's a problem.
Amazon made this big announcement about $15 an hour. They raised.
I know they were really proud about that.
But you know what they did? They cut all benefits.
They cut their bonuses.
Now the bonuses.
That doesn't exist.
Any sort of options.
They just bought their increase.
Yeah.
I mean, this is as bad. This is as bad as General Motors getting all this money, and then laying off all these people who paid in their taxes. So in effect, they paid out of their pocket to save their company, and then they get screwed. This is just not right. There's something really wrong with that.
We have a large distribution center in Lexington, Kentucky, or actually Paris, Kentucky, which is just outside of Lexington. And Amazon's got this massive distribution center there. I mean, we have one there. They have a lot.
Is that near Bowling Green, Kentucky?
Not far.
Not far, because my Corvette was built there.
There you go. And the issue there is everybody was coming to us and say, well, Amazon's paying $15 an hour, so are now you giving us $15 an hour? Well, no, we don't pay $15 an hour, but go look at the print. And so they all came back and said, oh, well, your jobs are very good. You're very competitive. Rich, unfortunately, we're out of time. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.